Good morning, Chapter 9. Humanoids make their entry. The second coming of Christ is vividly foreshadowed by the second coming of diabolism, DG kill. The burgeoning of demonic activity in our time is proof of our proximity to the last days and to the mightiest power encounter of all history. The sons of God are on a collision course with the saints of God, and we may well be witnessing the opening scenario. No matter where you live on this planet, someone within 200 miles of your home has had a direct confrontation with a frightening apparition or inexplicable monster. So writes John Keel, one of the world's leading authorities on psychic phenomena and unidentified flying objects. There is a chance, a very good one, that sometime in the next few years you will actually come face to face with a giant, hair-covered humanoid or a little man with bulging eyes surrounded by a ghostly greenish glow. Notice they just said giant, hair-covered humanoid. Can we say Bigfoot? Have they arrived? Does this mean that the sons of God have finally arrived? How much hard evidence is there that the Nephilim are here now? And are the Nephilim to be identified with the occupants of these space vehicles that circle our globe and sometimes land on our planet? No question is more vital, and certainly none more intriguing than that of trying to identify the occupants that emerge from these space vehicles. These entities have been seen on numerous occasions, sometimes inside, sometimes, I'm getting closer, sometimes outside their vehicles. Added to the hundreds of known witnesses are a multitude of others who have decided not to reveal their observations for fear of ridicule. If I went and told my friend, okay, I've never seen an actual UFO, I don't think. But if I did, and I went and told my circle of friends, they would just smile and nod and humor me. I think I lost my mind. Well, they tell each other I'd lost my mind. A few years ago, UFOs themselves were scoffed at, but accumulated data and the indisputable evidence of so many witnesses has changed that. Today, UFOlogy is treated with a degree of acceptability and respect. As for UFO occupants, however, this question is still very much a no-no. Creatures from outer space are unknown to science. Consequently, to study them would be to invite certain ridicule. However, in view of the evidence submitted by hundreds of bona fide witnesses, plus footprints and other physical records left on terra firma, the question of the humanoids can no longer be ignored. One is forced to ask, who are they? Where do they come from? Whither do they go? What is their mission, and why are they here? What are they like? Before we attempt to answer these questions, we must first determine the number of times that humanoids have actually been seen by people. Are the aliens many? Or are they few? I'm scooting a little closer. Sun to my eyes. Facts and figures. In 1954, in France, 42 cases of humanoids and sightings were recorded. In Latin America in 1965, there were 25 such reported cases, many of them multiple witnessed. This gives us a total of 67 sightings in just 2 years, and in France and Latin America alone. And to these, the other instances that have been recorded in the USA, the USSR, and the UK, and Australia, and the number comes to many hundreds, far too many to be unceremoniously dismissed as mere folklore. Remember, this book was from the 70s. A lot more now. On YouTube, L.A. Morzulli, got a lot of good stuff like this. That's where I learned about said book. Another factor that should not be ignored is that these witnesses, although living in different parts of the world, were where most had never heard or read about the others, described the humanoids with an uncanny similarity. And much of this similarity is of such a character that only an expert in the field could understand and appreciate it. Collusion between the witnesses was obviously out of the question, a further factor which confirms their credibility. Dr. J. Allen Hynek refers to this when he says, "The reader will discover for himself that there is a very great similarity in accounts of occupant cases in reports from all over the world. He will learn that they are similar not only in the description of the appearance of most humanoids, but in their reported actions. It would be helpful, one feels, if we could demonstrate that close encounters of the third kind differ systematically from the other 5 UFO categories. Then we could, with some comfort, dismiss them. But they do not differ in any way, by geographical distribution, by times of occurrence, in numbers, and especially in kinds of observers, except that the relative number of cases with multiple witnesses is somewhat less. We have already discarded the thesis that the humanoids are denizens of other planets or galaxies, and thus limited our options to one of 2. These entities are either spirit beings, angels, from heaven, or spirit beings, demons, from hell. As to which of these 2 options, I shall reserve judgment until the next chapter. At the moment, let us examine the available physical descriptions of these humanoids to find a clue to their identity." Physical features. The variety of their physical features, such that Donald B. Hanlon may be right when he says, "It would seem at first glance..." I gotta put on my hat. I'm getting a sunburn. Excuse me. Pardon me. My forehead's getting a little burnt, and I'm very bright white. Don't need to be getting burnt. Donald B. Hanlon may be right when he says, "It would seem at first glance as if our visitors had made a deliberate and concentrated effort to confuse us. As to size, they range all the way from dwarfs to giants. Some were smaller than a meter in height. The humanoid that Madame Leboeuf saw in Chabille in 1954 was like a child in a plastic bag. The humanoids seen by Professor R.L. Jonas in the famous Villa Santina case in 1947 were no more than 90 centimeters high. The one seen by Yago and Payo Rodriguez near the National Polytechnic Institute in Mexico City in 1965 were only about 80 centimeters. And the 2 humanoids seen by the gold miners John Q. Black and John Van Allen near Bush Creek, California in 1953 were simply described as midgets. Of the 25 sightings in Latin America in 1965, 10 of the humanoids were described as small men and 12 as tiny. On the other hand, some of the creatures have been described as veritable giants, measuring anything up to 15 feet. Those seen in 1962 by Dr. Gazua, a well-known and highly reputable physician in Crespo, Argentina, were described as gigantic beings. The testimony presented by the famous doctor electrified the country. The humanoids observed in 1952 by a number of people in Flatwoods, West Virginia, were described as being 10 and 15 feet tall. The 2 humanoid footprints seen in 1963 by John McGoldrick and his friend in Sandling Woods, England, measured 2 feet long and 9 inches across. Between these two extremes, there have been many humanoids described as similar to human beings in size. More features. As to the other features, they present the same kind of variety. Most have been described as having 2 eyes, usually very large ones. There have been a few described as 1-eyed and some as 3-eyed. As to the complexion, some were seen as white and pallid, others as blood red. Some were hairy, others had no hair at all. One humanoid was described as having wings like a bat, another as a mothman. Some were seen as Christ-like beings, and others as monstrosities of evil. The most consistent of humanoid descriptions speak of the similarities between humanoids and humans, some as subhuman, others as superhuman, but in both cases much closer to human beings than to any other living creature. Eric von Daniken says the same thing, but in a different way. Not that they resemble us, but we them. Just as in our time, humanoids resemble humans, so in the Bible times, angels resembled humans. Captain J.C. Brown, late editor of Living Links, makes this interesting comment. Whenever in the Bible we read of angels contacting people, three things were always noted about them. First of all, they suddenly appeared. There was no approach from a distance. Secondly, they always were taken at first for men. See Genesis 18 and 19, Judges 13, 2 and 3, Acts 1, 10. Thirdly, they always brought some rational, comforting message from God. As for details of the humanoids, a number of witnesses have referred to their large heads and craniums. In the famous contact made by Barney and Betty Hill of Boston, the humanoids had odd-shaped heads with a large cranium, which got smaller in size toward the chin. In the Villa Santina case in Italy, Professor Joannis described the two humanoids in these terms. Their heads, according to the impression I got, were bigger than the head of a normal man. Although in size they were no taller than 90 centimeters. Amy Michel describes the little men seen in the provincial village of Valençol, France as pumpkin heads, and with brains at least 3 times as big as ours. In sighting after sighting in South America, Mexico, United States, France, etc., there seems to be a preponderance of small humanoids with big heads. I believe we call them today alien greys. Another feature that has received increasing attention is their eyes. Witness after witness has commented on the size, type, and position of the eyes. Here are a few specimens drawn from dozens of cases. Barney and Betty Hill recalled under hypnosis that the humanoid they saw had slanted eyes that continued around the sides of the head. In this way, they seem to have a wider lateral vision than humans. Professor Joannis states that the eyes of the two humanoids he saw were enormous, protruding, and round. He compared their appearance and color to 2 well-ripened yellow-green plums. And he noticed something else. In the center of the eyes, I noticed a kind of vertical pupil. I saw no traces of eyebrows or eyelashes, and what I would have called the eyelids consisted of a ring midway between yellow and green, which surrounded the base of those hemispherical eyes, just like the frame of spectacles. Antonio Villas-Boas, describing the female humanoid aboard the vehicle where he was forcibly taken, tells us that her eyes were large and blue, more elongated than round, being slanted outwards, like the slit eyes of those girls who make themselves up fancifully to look like Arabian princesses. That is how they were, with the difference that here the thing was natural, for there was no makeup whatever. Cat eye, eyeliner, you know that eyeliner, winged eyeliner? Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker of Pascagoula, Mississippi, described the 3 humanoids they saw as being silver-skinned with big eyes. It is surprising how many witnesses have mentioned how thin the lips of the humanoids seem to be. Barney Hill said they were much like when you draw one horizontal line with a short perpendicular line on each end. The horizontal line would represent the lips without the muscle that we have. Antonio Villas-Boas also commented on this fact and reported that the female he saw had lips that were thin and hardly visible. The face of the humanoid narrows considerably and ends in a pointed chin. This was mentioned by Antonio Villas-Boas, Mrs. Wesley Simmons of Cincinnati, Ohio, and many others. What adds to the interest is that all these features, heads, eyes, lips, and chins, are combined in a number of important cases. M. Maurice Massey of the French provincial village of Valençol describes the entities he saw on the morning of July 1st, 1965, as having pumpkin-like heads, high fleshy cheeks, large eyes, which slanted around the sides of the face, slit mouths or holes without muscular lips, and very pointed chins. Mrs. Wesley Simmons of Cincinnati, describing her experience of July 3, 1955, as she was driving through Stockton, Georgia, saw a humanoid that had large, bulging eyes, a cap-like affair on his head, no visible mouth, a long pointed nose, and a chin that came to a sharp point. Its long, thin arms ended in claw-like appendages. And of course, the granddaddy of all occupant sightings, the one witnessed by the Sutton family in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Bill Taylor, a relative, was visiting the Sutton home the evening of August 22, 1955, and describes one of the entities he saw. It appeared to be lit by an internal source, had a roundish head, huge elephantine ears, and a slit-like mouth which extended from ear to ear. The eyes were huge and wide-set, only about 3 feet high. The creature had no visible neck, and its arms were long and ended in clawed hands. I swear I've seen an X-Files episode where they used this case in one of their storylines, because that's what came to mind when I read this about the dudes in Kentucky from 1955, the family that had this experience. In the two last cases mentioned is made of claw-like appendages instead of hands. This also seems to be the description made by a number of other witnesses. Jacques Vallée mentions one of these when he writes of 3 young men in San Carlos, Venezuela, seeing a small humanoid on December 16, 1954. In spite of his dwarfish size, this humanoid attacked one of the young men with his claws. The young man was later treated in the hospital for his wounds. It is interesting how the color red appears in many of the descriptions. The group who saw the giant humanoid in the Flatwoods, West Virginia, Flatwoods of West Virginia. Flatwoods is an actual place. On September 12, 1952, mentioned his blood-red face. Antonia Villas-Boas describes the hair on the armpits of the woman with whom he had relations aboard the space vehicle as very red, almost the color of blood. Barney Hill described one of the humanoids he saw and says that he reminded him of a red-headed Irishman. The entity seen by the 3 boys in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, on the evening of August 28, 1963, had a complexion that was a vivid red. The entities seen by Eduardo Luan Jacobi and his wife on August 20, 1965, Argentina, were shining violet-colored or reddish-colored figures, like and unlike. What do all these descriptions really tell us? One thing for certain, these entities are like humans and yet quite different. According to the laws of biology, the human body is typical of planet Earth. The Bible corroborates this in 1 Corinthians 15:38-40 and 44-49. This earthly body is adapted to the gravity, pressure, and chemical composition of the atmosphere, and it is conditioned by factors like our distance from the sun. Beyond that, it is not possible to be definite, and men can only speculate. Thus, we are left with the fact that the physical nature of these beings tells us little of their true identity. They share some similarities with humans, but that is all. To identify them with more precision, one has to examine their character. Are they benevolent or malevolent, friends or foes? Are they here to help us or to corrupt and seduce us? That concludes chapter 9.